What's up? So this is Ray. Today's the 24th of October 2017. Just for the record, this is a private consultation in diagnostic reading for my client Chris Mundy. Birth data. It's December 25th, 1970. Born on a Friday at 4:25 a.m. in Houston, Texas. I apologize. I guess I hope you forgive me. There we go. That's what I meant to say. I'm a little bit, I shouldn't be airhead more or less. I'm just a little bit, spread thin mentally. Just because I'm sure you know some of the really epic stuff going on. So if it seems kind of abrupt, I'm just going to do myself a favor, and when I feel, like I've got some mojo going, I'm just gonna blurt out some stuff and probably stop it. So if it seems like I'm just picking up and off, and if my hair changes or something like that, to that extent, this is the disclaimer ahead of time that I'm just gonna pick up and go on and off when I feel that the intuitive flash more or less is coming to me, so I don't meander forever and ever. Anyway, so just for a generalization here, you're a Capricorn Sun, and you have a Scorpio moon, and you have a Scorpio rising. So Scorpio rising being your key sign, Pluto and Mars would be your key planets. So you have Pluto in Virgo at 29 degrees, which is the exaltation or the most evolved degree of any planet or whatever, or asteroid point. And then you also have Mars in Scorpio at 11 degrees in the 12th house. So that would mean that your 10th and 12th house are the prime focals within this chart. And within your soul chart, more or less, you're actually you're actually a Scorpio rising as well, so same applies. So soul, on a soul progression level, as well as a physical manifestation of this life right now level, the 10th and the 12th house are always going to be the focals for you. So the one thing I'd like to point out here is that you have Jupiter conjunct Neptune on the ascendant. So when you have Neptune on the ascendant, and since Jupiter's more or less a facet of Neptune from ancient and medieval translations, they kind of just, it's a double whammy, or they translate the same. So when you have Neptune near the ascendant, Neptune is supposed to be the fog or some sort of confusion, disorientation, or lack of clarity. So lack of clarity with self and self-identity, or the self's actual existence. The fact that you have this signature, which would obviously translate in on the soul karmatic level as well as the physical life you have now, means that you on a evolving consciousness level have issues distinguishing the spirit world with the physiological world. Therefore, you'd also have issues discerning the difference between who you are now and who you were before you were born, and who you will continue to be afterwards. So the issue that that creates is that there's obviously an identity crisis. So when we look to the 5th house, which is associated with the self and self-identity and self-expression, you have Chiron there in Aries. So Aries has to do with the self in the 1st house, right? And Chiron is your Achilles heel, or your weakness. You have it within a conjunction to Eris that's retrograde, and Ceres there as well. So what that signifies is that a lot of your lack of objectivity or awareness of the self, who you are, your behavior, how you impact people in your life, how you contribute to the collective whole as a whole, your perception of what your reputation is, or the way that you project yourself to the world, is either disillusionment to you, confused, or it's a completely warped sense of what's really going on. So Ceres being in that house, the 5th house as well, self in Aries, would insinuate that once you have an objective perspective and clear view of who you are and how you affect people, and the dynamic of how you interact with everybody else, and kind of your life cycles in general, which I'm sure you, being born in 1970, you've at least at this point learned the hard way that you've picked up on some of the cycles, perhaps maybe more or less of like the Plutonic kind of challenges with that. Because definitely there's a strong Plutonian signature with you having a stellium with Mars, Venus, the Moon, and Jupiter all in Scorpio. So we continue on with the lack of identity of self. In the opposing house, we have Uranus. So Uranus is a trauma signature. It's in the 11th house, which is associated with Uranus, a trauma signature. And it being in Libra is associated with your relationship with other people, or your social bonds in general. So that's perpetuated by that squaring to the cluster of planets in the second house, which is your Sun, which is obviously associated with self, your Vulcan, and your Mercury. Your Mercury is retrograde, meaning that you usually when Mercury goes retrograde, you're usually a little bit more mentally on top of things as opposed to when it's direct. You also are more of you absorb and reflect on things as opposed to being an intuitive or some sort of extrovert sort of a character with your mental ideations. So with specifically, you have that Chiron and Eris from your 5th house of self squaring to your Sun and your Vulcan and your Mercury, as well as Uranus squaring from your 11th house. So what that signifies is that there's a continuous vicious cycle of you having some sort of traumatic occurrences or imbalances with your relations with other people, specifically stemming from your lack of identity and your confusion of who you are and how you interact with other people, and how your behavior and your existence influences others around you. So that lack of objectivity or awareness, and you being Plutonian naturally means you're very intense, and unfortunately, as the dice has dealt with most Plutonians throughout their life, they go through a very significant time period where the majority of their existence is the epitome of toxicity, whether it's being projected onto other people or if it's kind of like self-internal, like destructive sort of things. Destruction is just a thing that's associated with Pluto, and that's just something that Plutonians cannot escape. And that's not a pun about your Neptune on your ascendant, by the way. But so once you're aware of how you actually influence or affect other people, your behavior, which again, Neptune being in your 1st house and near your ascendant would mean that you're completely unaware or detached from your the actual reality of how you influence or impact other people, how your attitude, how your mentality, or how the way that you engage with people. So Mars is associated with action or act, or it has to do with your behavior as well as the Moon does. So the Moon and Mars both being in the 12th house means that you're completely detached from the way that your feelings and how your feelings are projected through your behavior, and also with Venus being in between the Moon and Mars, that would just reemphasize that you're unaware, or maybe you're just unsure, or you've just been completely trying to steer away and be like escapism sort of thing with your feelings, likely due to some toxicity, primarily with some specific unstable or emotional turmoil or potentially traumatic kind of scenarios that happened in your early life or in your home life. And so instead of you actually coping and trying to process and grieve or whatever and be open, because the Scorpio risings are notorious for not really being open with things, and you having a feminine Mercury as well as it being retrograde, it just reemphasizes that you're going to clam up and not really talk about things. Not to mention that Mercury is also in a grand trine with Black Moon Lilith in Virgo in your 10th house, and then it's also trining to Saturn and Hades. Hades is associated with the ethers and the paranormal anomalies. So the thing that is the silver lining with this as well is Juno is actually in that 6th house too. So it goes Juno, Saturn, and then Hades. So you have Hades and Saturn both retrograde, which again is review. You need to relearn some things, or you need to redo from last time. So something about you establishing your sense of identity and sense of purpose, which kind of is a vicious cycle going back to Neptune being near your ascendant. It'll be likely a soul progression challenge throughout your evolution, even past beyond this life, that this will be a reoccurring thing for you. Maybe this might at least help a little bit, so you have a little less retrograde planets next time. But once you become aware of the vicious cycle of you not being able to confidently define yourself and identify yourself, you will be able to essentially heal yourself. Taurus with Juno would be associated with stability. So that would be some sort of solid foundation of self. So that would essentially be a healing sort of aspect to the Chiron that's your Achilles heel, or your weakness in your house of self. So again, the 8th house is associated with secrets. You have the earth symbol, which is associated with your foundation and more or less your manifestation of the physiological existence here. And it's in Cancer, which reinforces what I was just making commentary about, how that you may have likely had an unstable or perhaps toxic or unsure kind of foundation in life at home, either that stemming from your mother specifically, or if it was just because the home in general was just unstable at the time. I would say it's safe to say mother, because usually the moon in Scorpio, that's associated with poison or toxicity, and the moon is directly associated with the mother most of the time. It being in opposition with Saturn, which is the father more or less, and even still it's squaring to the sun, which is the other facet that could represent the father, or Jupiter. That would, Jupiter being in Scorpio, that's toxic, or it being aspecting to the sun, meaning that there's some sort of toxic influence, or more of like emotional abuse or whatever inflicted towards the self or son that could be attributed to you specifically, or the father. But specifically, I would assume that the Saturn in Taurus would be the father. So if there were an opposition between the moon and Saturn, that would specifically signify that there was polarizing kind of narratives, or that there was constant feuds, fighting, and an unstable environment, likely emotional toxicity in general, that may have tried to be withheld from you. But despite the fact that that never works, because within the first 7 years of life, you're a psychic sponge. So even if you weren't intuitive, which you having an overwhelming influence of water and your modality being fixed, you, and just having Neptune near the ascendant as well, you were very, very aware of what was going on, and you potentially absorbed it more so, of all the psychic stains and the kind of emotional toxicity going on, more so than some people might have. And that's also emphasized too with your 29 degrees in Pluto, because that is the higher evolved sense of Pluto, and Pluto has to do with the psyche. You do have 25 degrees for the moon in Scorpio as well, 26 degrees in Jupiter, and let's see, that's it for that. But let me go ahead and take a time out here, and I'll come back. Time back in. I totally called the whole, I'm going to change my hair and everything, didn't I? It's totally the second day now. Anyway, so I'm not trying to spill over into my drama llama with my computer, but that's kind of the long story short with that. So I'm just going to continue on. I'm not even going to look back and rewatch, because I kind of feel like I'm dealing with a trine to Neptune right now, which is like basically a really foggy mentality. I'm sure that there's a trine from Neptune to Jupiter or Mercury right now. I'm not even going to go there. It feels, I at least can still mentally process things, but I feel like I'm on slow-mo. So I'm not even going to give myself the opportunity to just review something and then just get sidetracked. So, we can go ahead and walk by, I don't care.
Okay.
So I was looking at your Placidius. So your Placidius is the, if you're obviously not familiar with charts, the way that modern charts are labeled is how you have certain cusp alignments or whatever. Like, for example, your first house, instead of the entire house being ruled by Scorpio, it's just about 5 degrees into this first house, that it's Scorpio. But since it starts off on the cusp with Scorpio, Scorpio is the ruler of this house. But in equal house systems, we're going to pretend that Scorpio actually rules over that entire house. So it actually redefines the lines in between where the planets are located. So specifically with your Placidius, which is like the modern charts that most people use, if they even know how to read these, you have Jupiter, Neptune, and Vesta in the first house. Then you have the Sun, Vulcan, and Mercury in the second house. You have nothing in the third house. Then you have Pallas in the fourth. Then you have Chiron, Eris, and Ceres in the fifth house. Then you have Juno, Saturn, and Hades in the sixth house. Nothing in the seventh. Then the Earth grounding aspect in the eighth. Then you have the Trans-Pluto and Hygeia in the ninth. Then you have Black Moon, Lilith, and Pluto in the 10th. Then you have Uranus in the 11th. And then you have Mars, Venus, and the Moon in the 12th. So when we look at equal is actually the chart that is used for medieval astrology or ancient kind of associations. This is more of like the Neoplatonic, fatalistic sort of things, more of my kind of forte. But specifically, the distinctive difference between using Placidius, which is the modern one I just was labeling off for you, and this one is that the Placidius gives more of an insight to the dynamic of the character of the individual and some of the really specific, more or less frivolous kind of details of the individual of that life. The equal house, or the medieval, is specifically giving you more of an overview of the progression of the life or the life journey. So this is more of a timeline, kind of black and white outline to get an idea of the progression, as opposed to some of like the astropsychoanalytic quirks that you have. So with the equal, you still have, the only thing that really changed is that you have the polar ascendant, which is another midpoint, in Gemini in the 7th house. And you have, for whatever reason, the nodes weren't showing up with your Placidius, so I didn't go over that. Your North Node is in Aquarius, and it's conjunct, obviously, with your IC and Pallas in the 4th house. So fascinatingly enough, you having the nodes on the IC and the MC is fascinating enough in itself. And you actually have them backwards, so the IC is supposed to be where you originate from, and your MC is supposed to be where you ascend to. But you have your South Node on the MC, and you have your North Node on the IC. So again, this is kind of reinforcing what I was saying earlier, how you are, like on a soul karmatic level or a draconic level, you have issues distinguishing the difference between the soul realm or essentially your physical life now, just because of your ongoing identity crisis. So specifically, you're supposed to understand the origin of where you come from throughout this life. That's your goal. And the fact that your nodes are retrograde means that this has been a reoccurring review lesson for you, which again, me re-emphasizing how you have an identity crisis even in death on a soul level, as opposed to just in your life now. That obviously that's going to take quite a bit of challenges and working out things and life experiences throughout reincarnations for you to finally get a sense of self, or how your mysterious kind of Neptune chameleon persona actually is contributory to the whole. So the only thing specifically that's really changed with planets moving different houses besides that polar ascendant is you have Pluto in the 11th house with Uranus. So in your Placidius chart, Pluto's in your 10th house, meaning that obviously your toxic Plutonian persona is more or less projected onto your reputation. So you're probably very intimidating, more or less. I mean, that's even just saying with you being a Capricorn, but Capricorns are usually, they have a very stern kind of demeanor, and they try to give off this, really, really strong persona. And then you being super platonic on top of that, you're probably very intimidating, despite the fact that you don't realize that. I'm assuming you probably don't realize that. So when you have Pluto in the 11th house with Uranus there, Pluto in this sense would represent more or less transformation, as opposed to obviously being like a astro-psychoanalytic characteristic of you. So Pluto represents mutation, transformation, or some sort of growth or adaptation. So the 11th house is associated with your sociological institutions, the facets of things beyond the self or greater than you, which could attribute to sociological, global networking, and then even on a bigger level, like beyond, so the life consciousness beyond this sort of thing. So for this particular life, the North Node being on the IC would be the emphasis of you somehow becoming grounded in some way, shape, or form throughout this life, likely due to you having significant triplicities with Earth here, because you have the Sun, Vulcan, and Mercury all in Capricorn, then you have Juno, Saturn, and Hades all in Taurus, and then you have the MC, Black Moon, Lilith, and Pluto all in Virgo. So there's obviously some sort of emphasis on trying to ground you. And let's see. So overall, I guess life progression is that you're trying to stabilize or solidify some sort of trust or associations with other people, because that's an ongoing issue you've had. Your polar ascendant would be, being in Gemini would mean that let's see, let me click on this actually. I'm not, to be totally frank, that showed up in my generated chart thing, and I'm actually not entirely thorough with it, but the polar ascendant would essentially be integrating with other things. So Gemini is associated with integration of your immediate environment, or integration on a communicative level, or specifically siblings or other, close associated people, neighbors, or whatever. And Gemini obviously having to do with bonding or talking, so it would have to do with you actually communicating, which again is likely something difficult for you with a retrograde Mercury, as well as it being in a feminine associated sign. The best way for you to actually be more self-aware, as I kind of said, and for you to feel more grounded, is to actually talk. And your North Node being in Aquarius, that's associated with an air sign that's for talking and communicating, and specifically associated with the 11th house, so like of socializing and everything. Aquarians are the humanitarians at heart, but only from a distance sort of thing. So there definitely has to be some sort of direct correlation or relation with humanity or people in general, regardless if it's a love-hate thing for most Aquarian archetypes. Let me see what else. How long did this clip go? I'll time out again. Alright, time back in. I'm not gonna lie, I may seem a little like blown away, because I was actually calculating your perfection chart. So the perfection is attributed to, I basically have this huge giant graph on my wall where I calculate the actual specific year of life. So since you were born in 1970, you should be 47 right now. If for some reason my math is wrong, don't feel any hesitation to call me out on it. I'm dyslexic and horrible with math, if I haven't already, elaborated on that. So you should be 48, meaning that 47, which is up until you turn, 48 in December, Libra is the key sign. So since you have Uranus in Libra specifically, this would be, you actually started experiencing your quote-unquote midlife crisis 5 years ago, when Neptune went into Pisces in 2012. So the fact that it's more or less Neptune and Pisces is supposed to be associated with people just completely being detached from reality. So you already being normally detached from reality most of your life, this has been like a reality check for you in the last few years. Which, funny enough, I totally can relate, because I have Sun square Neptune in my own chart, and I've been dealing with similar kind of things, and that's what I was emphasizing about how we have similar charts in that aspect. So you've seemed like you've been more in tune with reality these last 5 years as opposed to your entire life, and you're just actually probably in shock and awe just as much as I am about how detached and fucking psycho and delusional people are being. And so this is actually more of your coming to terms with things and grounding yourself, like the things that you're supposed to be working on, because it takes 84 years for Uranus to go around all 12 houses, And so when you were born, you obviously had Uranus in Libra. So halfway between that is your quote-unquote midlife crisis. And since Uranus is associated with a trauma signature, and yeah, it's the opposing house of the self, it is directly symbolized by midlife crisis. So as it's been through Aries, it's already past the exact opposition aspect, because your Uranus is at 13 degrees of Libra, and Uranus is currently at 26 degrees of Aries retrograde. So while Uranus has been retrograde as well, which it hasn't been for very long, that would give you a chance to reflect. And specifically, let me check. What is your 24 degrees of Ceres? Okay, gotcha. So we have Uranus at 26 degrees, right? So you have Uranus conjunct with your Ceres right now, and that's been going on for off and on throughout this year and part of last year. So you've likely becoming more aware of yourself in general, or ways that you may have been neglecting yourself, or things that you need to address, or basically midlife crisis sort of thing. If you've been neglecting yourself throughout your life, which your chart kind of insinuates as such, then your midlife crisis was definitely hell. And that being said, I'm actually going to grab my little notepad thing here, because I know that you can take it, and I know that the fact that I am right and you've lived this means that there's no reason to give it to you, nicely. Because even the way that I would vaguely, articulate it, it would be nothing to the graphic extent of what your life probably has been. But so what I wrote down is that Sam is 47 years old, perfection from the 2016 to 2017 year was in Libra. 48 years old, obviously Scorpio will be your key perfection sign. So that means that any planets that are in the sign of Scorpio in your chart are going to be the more prominent influences throughout your 48th year of life. So particularly, besides your ascendant, you have that stellium, your moon and Venus and Mars, in your 12th house in Scorpio. So obviously Jupiter already being in Scorpio this year as well, and that magnifies it. And Jupiter is associated with the ancient ruler of Pisces too, so that could be attributed to the 12th house. And then primarily one of the things that you've been concerned about, you were asking me, is that if you're possessed, or that you think you're going to be possessed because your daughter accused you of such. Which, absolutely, I think she's projecting, not only because of my own personal, experiences. The fact that she's very similar to me, I actually haven't glanced at her chart thoroughly yet. I just kind of went off of some of the points that you told me. Because I know myself well enough, and I know that she's got enough generational planets and personal planets that specifically are like mine, to know right off the bat that she's going to definitely have some paranormal problems if she hasn't already. And this isn't anything like deflecting blame, but you being her mother, I don't think that this will be her first encounter with this. And her specifically just being born around the time frame that I was, the Pluto Scorpio generation is just the poster child for paranormal phenomena. If you even think back to if you reference any of those pamphlets, or like pop culture sort of things where it says the things that were coming out when you were born in that year or whatever, like the most trendy thing, or the movies that came out, specifically the kind of attitudes or demographic or interests or even studies, or especially things being released entertainment wise or with news and research, those are distinctly identical or similar to the interests or the influences that influence an individual's life. So I remember this specifically, and it scared the tar out of me, and that should be validation enough right there. The Poltergeist movies were coming out right around the time that I was born, and then the trilogy continued on into, I think the last one was 1989, and then there were some really, really crazy, creepy movies. That was the huge spike for really fucked up horror movies and stuff, specifically with random things just getting possessed. So just think of that. Yeah. So your daughter's definitely projecting. I sent you 2 jars of anise, by the way. because apparently I'm guessing that you needed it. And yeah, but and if you need any more of that, then that's fine. We can talk about the price and everything later. I know you're a lot of earth, so you're like really fixated on how much you owe me. We'll work it out. But anyway, so yeah, your daughter's definitely possessed, or she's definitely got something with her right now. The fact that she's accusing somebody else of doing it means that she's thoroughly subconsciously aware, or she's deflecting guilt because she's one of those dumbasses that plays with Ouija boards because she's like hardcore dark or trying to be cool and trendy and shit and be like, I'm not afraid of that. And yeah, that's not a, you obviously already have seen my Facebook and everything. It's not a good time. Like, you can literally pick up a demon or some spiritual entity without trying to fucking do a seance right now. Like, that's the worst fucking thing you could be doing. So, and by the way, you can, if you actually just go get some star anise. Let me see, where did I put that at? Like, I can get this from, like, my local grocer. These are just, like, the star anise, or you can get anise seeds, even. I got some of those today. Where I'm going to make anise, like, apple cider muffins, or, you know, apple spice muffins, to give to people who can't have liquor or whatever. Or, you know, if your daughter does happen to drink, I have this feeling that she probably does, just with some of the aspects in her chart, or at least the planets that you're telling me about. If you just, like, make her, like, a Washington apple or something like that, and just put the base of it with the anise, just don't tell her. Or something of that effect. Make rum balls with those things, or, you know, like I said, however you got to do it. Also, rosemary is a, it says an equivalent or an effective substitute. It doesn't really, you know, emphasize that it's that great, but I've read some references that rosemary is as an effective substitute. But she has to ingest it regularly. Yeah, so let's just get back to you. Anyway, so obviously Scorpio is going to be the key sign for you. So the 12th house, as we've talked about with this, is the ether world. So the polarity that would manifest as an effect of Scorpio being your key sign for this year is going to be everything that's associated with the 6th house. And that's exactly why you contacted me and why you started to think maybe you need to have a reading, and why you're worried if you're possessed, regardless if it's what your daughter said or if it's like intuitively something you're picking up, because you have Hades and Saturn in that house. And they're in Taurus. And actually, whew, that correlates exactly with this. So, right here, I'll kind of show you visually. Okay, so, right here, Taurus is going into Uranus. I think that that's in like the 2nd or 3rd month. Don't quote me, I can look at it in a minute, of next year. And so, Uranus is a trauma signature. We've already talked about this. And you've obviously been having Uranus go over your house of self, so you've been having very traumatizing, probably, epiphanies, or, you know, coming to realization with things, likely not very, subtle or, smooth transition with, you know, basically having to come out of your denial and validate that you've been either, you know, inflicting abuse, projecting abuse on other people, or that other people have been abusing you, or that you've been neglecting or abusing yourself, or all of the above. So now that's going to, you basically, like, dealing with the, coming to the shock, or this, you know, realization, is now going to feel like it's a trauma on your daily life, because your 6th house is associated with your daily life. So this is very, very important that you basically try to soften the blow as much as you can with this transition, because the 6th house is directly associated with your health as well. And you have Saturn in that house too. So Saturn takes away and debilitates whatever house it's represented by. And it being in the 6th house, that would be associated with health. And so in it being in Taurus would mean that you likely suffer from malnutrition. And you might actually have some sort of, and this isn't, I'm not trying to, like, you know, get too personal, or, you know, feel like I'm trying to hit the nail on the head too hard. If I do, I apologize. You might have some sort of eating disorder or something to that effect. If you do, and regardless if you want to admit it or not or whatever, if that's the case, whatever the thing that you're potentially hiding that is attributed directly to Plutonian or Scorpio facets that directly affects your overall health or nutritional, you know, or actual physiological health, is going to exacerbate substantially. And specifically, Obviously, since all disease is caused by the dead, it would be the emphasis with the dead, and actually that kind of goes into this. So the total solar eclipse that happened on the 21st of August, just a little bit back, the degree for it being in Leo for the sun and the moon was at 28 degrees. So your south node, which is on the MC, associated with the gods, or as above, the ether world more or less, is at 26 degrees retrograde in Leo. So that total solar eclipse that basically triggered the portal to the ether world opening up, as the dead have been telling me, was conjunct with your south node. So I was actually specifically telling kind of my boyfriend about this as I was writing some of my notes out and talking out loud. I'm like, wow, and I'm like, so she was like literally kind of more or less a lightning rod that for the actual strike that was the force that opened up the portal. I'm not blaming you. I'm not saying that you're to be at fault with that, because there's plenty of other people that were born around the same time as you that have similar aspects to you that are just as contributory to this, and that's the whole point of why you exist right now. And all those people specifically, they were more or less the actual grounding and lightning rods to connect the ether world to here. So this isn't like the blame game or anything like that. If you wouldn't be here, there would have been somebody else born with the same signatures in your place to do exactly what you're doing now. And fascinatingly enough, I thought about this too. You being born in Houston, or even being in the general area of Houston, Texas, that's exactly where the midhaven was for this eclipse. And that was the triggering aspect that caused the Hurricane Harvey. So if you think about that, like, think of the manifestations of the intense, like, and Neptune's obviously associated with water and drowning and, the weather and stuff like that. So yeah, the hurricane is a great analogy for that. So yeah, you thinking that you like should definitely learn about this and about yourself, and that you're concerned that potentially you might be possessed or be dealing with these sorts of things. Yes, you have been dealing with these throughout your entire life, just as I have, and just like me, the intensity of the interactions is going to exacerbate substantially. So as a matter of fact, when I probably started slowly feeling these things, not necessarily when I started talking to them, but when I started to like actually feel like the looming anxiety that I've confirmed now as of late, that it's directly associated with like feeling like they're like on top of me kind of thing. That likely started when the eclipse happened in February for me. So that was like the end of February or the early part of February, maybe the end of January, when it started to really get like that. I remember I started feeling like the sinking depression, which depression's associated with them, in December going into January. So if you think of the polarizing seasons, and me actually, starting to experience things ahead of most people, you are the poster child more or less of exactly what I was talking about when people are going to start experiencing everything that I'm going through. And that's going to start when Saturn goes into Capricorn. And that's the first week of December, I believe. I'll have to double check with that. So yeah, so the total solar eclipse that happened was opposition with your North Node in Aquarius. So the force, the oppositional force, or the defiant force between you trying to ground yourself and learn who you are, and be able to basically develop some sort of identity to understand how you contribute to the collective whole. It's as if the ether world portal has literally opened up, and I'm not trying to use poltergeist-like analogies on purpose, but it's the concept of like when the closet opens up and it starts to suck everything in. The eclipse is the closet sucking everything in, and you're the kid trying to hang on to the other side, sort of thing. That's the kind of manifestation that's going on with this. So, yeah, me sending all those stones and stuff to you, and specifically feeling the need to go out and go get you tourmaline and send you some sachet protection things, and send you extra anise and the citron and everything like that. That was absolutely necessary, and thank goodness for my my series psychic thing from the elementals or whatever. You can thank them, because that's their thing. But yeah, that would be why I felt it was more imperative to send out your box before I bullshitted with your chart. Obviously, your chart's important, but your box will take a minute to get there. Which, by the way, I sent it out yesterday, so it'll arrive on Tuesday next week. Anyway, so yeah. So what else do I have here? I said, so you have obviously Pluto in Virgo in the 29th degree, and in recent times, Chiron, which is the weakness or Achilles heel, has been in Pisces, and it's specifically in the last few degrees of Pisces. So it's been in opposition with your Pluto. So you've been feeling like you're psychologically on the fritz, or that your last bit of sanity is fraying, and you basically coming out of the end of your quote-unquote midlife crisis, especially with how much of overall, like, in general, your life has been kind of a crisis signature, that you've been completely in the dark and unaware of. That would signify that. So that's going to be, unfortunately, a continuing thing. And as of right now, we have Neptune in Pisces that's in opposition with your Black Moon Lilith at 12 degrees of Virgo. So again, those are in your 11th and 10th house. So those are the two houses specifically that are associated with Saturn and Uranus, the ethers. So Pluto specifically would be the one that would be associated more with Uranus, or the traumatizing sort of ether spirits or whatever. So the chaos and outer future. And then the potential ascension or present would be where your Lilith is. So because you've actually been more or less like, a channeler or a Casper mouthpiece, or a toxic, what some people would consider like a destructive person, or a stain on people's cohesive kind of happily ever after kind of existence. It's because you've experienced those things now. It's actually going to be your history of coping and dealing with this, and how you've actually survived all this, which I would even love to hear. I was kind of mentioning that to my boyfriend. I'm like, wow. And I was like, I'm actually very impressed and amazed that somebody with these significant trauma signatures, especially after 5+ years going into their midlife crisis, is actually still doing as well as I'm guessing you are. I mean, I'm sure a lot of that is a front to an extent, but the fact that you're still alive and you're almost 50, I applaud you for that, because I really don't think I'm going to last that long. And that's not supposed to be a pun about me dying last month, but yeah, I mean, that would have been me. That would have, yeah. Dying by my own means, like either because of my own self-undoing shit or whatever. Like, yeah, that. Not getting murdered. But I'll probably end up getting murdered anyway, but let's not get into that. So the past 5 years, from 2012 to present, Neptune's been in Pisces. Then in 2015, so that would have been 3 years after your midlife crisis started, Neptune started squaring Saturn, since you're Capricorn, and you have that stellium in Capricorn, so your Sun, Vulcan, and Mercury. So you actually having, yeah, that's really tough. You having Neptune squaring yourself, your Sun, which would, I know what that's like. That's, that's total disillusionment and denial and fantasy and not actually being here in reality. Totally get that. You definitely started pulling out of that after the Neptune square Saturn thing wore off. And then obviously you having Neptune squaring your Mercury, that's kind of like how I've been feeling lately. So, but since you have a feminine Mercury and it's retrograde already, that might have actually been some clarity for you and worked as a polar opposite, especially since it's part of a grand trine with Black Moon Lilith and Saturn and Hades. So yeah, actually you'd be having more clarity as of that point on than anything. But yeah, so again, in your natal chart you have Uranus in Libra in the 11th house, which is trauma signature with other people or with your social groups or whatever. And obviously with Uranus going over your 5th house of self, it's been a emphasis or a focal on trauma with the self, or trauma towards you being likely aware of it, because the way that the aspect energy works, that if you're projecting trauma onto somebody else, the trauma gets reciprocated. Karma is actually feedback of energy and waves and vibrations, not necessarily some sort of conscious choice of something being weighed out and scaled against you or whatever. But other than that, let's see what else was I referencing. So you have Pallas, which is is also at 29 degrees. So Pallas represents wisdom seeker, intellectual pursuits, handicrafts, like Uranus, bearing wake-up calls, sudden changes, or shocks. Rules higher understanding of things, processes, however challenging, difficult, and demanding to change one's life. So this is like a Uranus transit going over your 4th house yet again. Which again means saying that the total solar eclipse being opposition that kind of just reinforces that. So it says that Pallas energy can be quite violent, disruptive, even destructive, making things as hard to endure as they can get in order to catalyze necessary action. In this light, Pallas by transit can point to times of great stress, particularly if the person affected is resisting change. And yeah, definitely you being a fixed ascendant and a fixed on the IC and a fixed DC, yeah, and a fixed MC, yeah, that's evident that well, you do have your MC at 2 degrees Virgo, but technically on the cusp level you have Leo going over your MC. So from an angular perspective, like of the core concepts of the self identity, you're fixed modality, meaning that you're very stubborn. So that would be why you're actually dealing with a lot of trauma. And I know that this is me just saying this doesn't make it any easier, but doing whatever you can to like stop fighting against any sudden change, because we have been in the mutable years for the past 3 years, which obviously that's ending in early December when Saturn goes into Capricorn. And so all the basically the force, the intense force of like the change that's been relenting, that you've been fighting against, all of the repercussions of you mentally, spiritually, or physically trying to resist it is going to become evident. Yep, that would reemphasize when Uranus goes into Taurus, into the 6th house. Whatever you've been doing to yourself to, continue to feed into the denial or fight against it or whatever, the repercussions of that is going to manifest, into early next year. Specifically when it's the peak of the ether spirit season. So when I specifically mentioned Saturn season and Aquarius season, that would be into late December, early January, throughout January and into February is when you're going to feel the huge brunt of that. Yep. So if there's any kind of health things that you have that have been an ongoing thing or some sort of conditions, absolutely get that checked immediately. As a matter of fact, let me... while I'm at it here, let's read off the associations. Alright, Capricorn. And just a disclaimer now, all these things that I read off doesn't mean that you actually have these or will develop these. These are just the signatures that are typically correlated with these actual signs and planets, or the placements, or the degrees, depending on the aspects at play, and the elemental balance would depend on if they actually manifest or not. So judging by your age as well, and especially since you just went through your Uranus midlife crisis thing, you'd likely already be able to validate that you've experienced these things in some way, shape, or form if they seem familiar to you. You also, being clairvoyant, you might pick up that there's something that you may need to potentially look into, something I might read off. So you have 3 degrees of Capricorn as the sun, so blindness, sleep and trance may be associated with that. And let's see, 5 degrees, sleep and trance, okay, and then 10 degrees would be alcoholism or impaired vision. And then going into Aquarius, 26 degrees. Alcoholism or neuroanesthesia. Okay, and then the second degree of Pisces, appendicitis. Absolutely. If you haven't if you have yet to experience appendicitis, you having Virgo for Pluto, and then it also having stressful aspects to this, definitely, if you have not had your appendix checked or had appendicitis, definitely that's something that you should be on top of your list to look for, at least be aware of the symptoms. Let's see, 4 degrees, asthma, and for Chiron and Aries, fevers, and then 11 degrees would be rheumatoid fever, rheumatoidism, or hemorrhages. And then Ceres at 24 degrees would be abscess, tuberculosis, digestive troubles. Well, good thing tuberculosis is actually caused by the ghosty things. So, yeah, you need to make sure you wear that tourmaline, that citron quartz 24/7, all the time. Let's see. Taurus 7 degrees. Alcoholism. So I'm starting to notice a pattern here. So I'm guessing that the drinking thing, you're not the first Capricorn, by the way. I'm not picking on you. You're not the first Capricorn that's had a closet drinking problem, but I mean, most Plutonians usually have their own, drug of choice of some, or self-medicated to some point or another. So that's not picking on you at all in any way. Let's move on to 16 degrees. Neuroanesthesia. So I'm going to spell that just in case I'm saying that wrong, because I'm sure I am. Neurasthenia. And then it emphasizes appendicitis again. Then 18 degrees, appendicitis again, and alcoholism. And then Gemini at 19 degrees would be Bright's disease or sleep trance. So I don't know if you sleepwalk, or if the sleep trance might be directly attributed to your connection and your intuitive kind of capacities. I would assume that would be the case. Then 3 degrees of Cancer would be eyesight issues. And then we have 14 degrees of Leo, bladder afflictions and alcoholism. I guess that even if you wanted to try to downplay or be in denial with me about, you're self-medicating, of choice, I think it's pretty much been beaten to the ground here. And I think that that's associated with your fixed associations too. 16 degrees of Leo re-emphasizes on the alcoholism and the appendicitis. And then 26 degrees of Leo would be drowning or asphyxiation or poisoning or appendicitis again. Okay. Then Virgo second 2 degrees, asthma. And then 12 would be a fever. And then 29 degrees would be drowning consumption. That's associated with drinking again. Then Libra at 13 degrees. Jaundice or kidney or renal pelvis. So I'm starting to notice something here. Taurus is associated with particularly Venus. Venus is associated with the kidneys specifically. And so if you haven't had appendicitis issues, I'm assuming you probably would have appendicitis issues anyway. I don't know how much you've actually been consulted by a physician about your kidneys or your kidney function, or if you happen to be diabetic. I'm not entirely sure. You apparently are really stressing on your kidneys. You're going to basically, that's going to be your way out if you're not careful, if anything. And that might be something that you need to address or something to that effect. I don't know. If I know that there's specific stones that actually help with people that are, I think it's actually amethyst quartz and turquoise specifically that help with people that have excessive consumption issues. Anything associated with Pisces will help you out as well. Let's see. Then 11 degrees of Scorpio is neuroaesthesia again, Bright's disease. And then 19 degrees, appendix, abscesses, danger of poison. There's that drinking thing again. And then 25 degrees would be alcoholism, muteness, tonsils, fractures, broken bones, or memory poisons. I feel ya. That's most of every Plutonian's like rationalization as to why they usually self-medicate is trying to block out the ideations or the mentality sort of thing. Then we have Jupiter at 26 degrees. That's again alcoholism, memory poisoning, consumption poisons, depression. And then the 1st degree of Sagittarius, susceptible to contagious diseases. Well, aren't you fucking lucky? Put those damn stones on and don't ever take them off. I guarantee you. Like, I have Gemini in Ascendant with Chiron there, opposition with Saturn and Uranus, squaring my Mars, and also, what is it? It's like a semi-square to Neptune in my disease house. Everybody in this damn house, because of the thing downstairs, got pneumonia earlier this summer, and despite the fact that I'm everybody's chauffeur and I touch everything else or whatever else, and there were times that I'm like, fuck, I didn't wash my hands, or fuck, I didn't, sanitize that I should have gotten sick, and I actually didn't, and it's directly, specifically because in some of the ancient texts I've read, pneumonia and any contagious like influenza disease like that are specifically caused by the fucking dead things. So when you put those stones on, you should be able to at least eliminate the fever and random, contagious diseases susceptible to that, etc., etc. Also, Neptune is associated with disease and contagious diseases too, so having Neptune in Sagittarius at the 1st degree is actually like one of the fucking worst aspects. Wow, you must have gotten a lot of flu and influenza throughout your life. That sucks, because that's like right on your ascendant. Wow, and it's got some nasty, stressful aspects to that. That is intense. And that's another thing that I was mentioning too, like, how the heck did you survive that long? And then appendicitis again for 4 degrees, and then pneumonia and typhoid. Holy cow. Wow. Anyway, so that's going around the wheel there for all the actual degrees with that. Let's see. Your moon is in Scorpio. So vital force disrupts itself in a concentrated and high intense manner, largely flowing into emotional and sexual systems through not uncommonly transformed towards spiritual efforts. Then the uterine fibroid, prostate congestion, yeast infections, vaginitis, leaky gut syndrome, bladder complaints, incontinence, overactive colon, runny nose, excessive sweating, emotional obsession, swollen testicles, sensitive genitals, jock itch, or hemorrhoids. Again, not all these will apply to you, just, some of them may, some of them might. Persons with Scorpio moon position need to be careful to maintain their acid or alkaline balance and in the staunchy minimalize soupy or bacteria inviting conditions of a genetic urinary tract or colon issue. Okay. Then your Saturn is in Taurus. Restrictions of the ear, nose, and throat region, toxic tonsils, chronic colds and sore throat, poor hearing, hypothyroid, tight neck, muscles, atlas bone out of place, structural restrictions of cervical vertebrae, TMJ, dental issues. I feel you with the TMJ thing. Reflexes to Scorpio, Leo, and Aquarius. Wow. Yep. Well, okay. So, how it was saying toxicity, tonsils. So, yeah, that's you having chronic issues with contagious diseases or whatever. And yeah, so it would be a significant toxin buildup in your body in general. Let's see. Mars is in Scorpio also. Mars, the pathology is associated with accidents, wounds, cuts, surgery, procedures, inflammation, expulsion, bacteria, virus, parasites, fever, rash, vomiting, diarrhea, and blistering. Those, Mars is also above the horizon, masculine sign, extremely hot. Okay. Yours is in cold. Night birth, sun under the horizon with Mars simultaneously under the horizon. Mars, a feminine sign, slows the metabolism. Unnaturally chilly. Astrological conditions with common with obesity. And then Mars and dignities, rulership is Aries and Scorpio. And then let's see. Natal Mars in any of these signs does not ensure that it will have conditions below. Mars may be afflicted by an aspect or detriment or fall or association with the 1st, 6th, 8th, or 12th house. So since you have it in the 12th house, it's debilitated. And you having it, let's see, Scorpio, vaginitis, bladder infection, infection of the female organs, nosebleeds, uterine hemorrhage, miscarriage, abortion, venereal disease, infection, or injury to male organs, colitis, hemorrhoids, worms of the colon, anus, excess sex hormones, chronic diarrhea, acne, due to vigorous toxins throughout the body, violent anal or genital itching, waterborne diseases, or wounds to the genitals or nose. Reflexes to Taurus, Aquarius, Leo. Yeah. So, specifically, a lot of that could stem from something to do with instability in your house. So it might have been you being exposed to toxic water, or in general, to that extent, not having, healthy quality of environments. Let's see. Venus in Scorpio. Yeast infection, excess sexual secretion, hemorrhoids, venereal disease, prolapse uterus, tumors, genital herpes problems due to abortion or miscarriage, toxic colon, or worms. Again, don't freak out. If not all those always apply. Jupiter in Scorpio. Enlarged prostate, uterine fibroids, swollen testicles, difficulty holding urine, excessive perspiration, swollen nose, incontinence, involuntary ejaculation, hydremia, edema, excessive secretions of urates, excessive sex hormones. Okay. And then Mercury in Capricorn. Itchy skin, intolerance to insect bites, anxiety, nervous stomach, sensitive teeth, poor hearing, depression, overwork, neural pains in the knees, and unstable knee. And Uranus in Libra, renal spasms, urinary incontinence, premature ejaculation, venereal skin rash, disrupts balances with the sex hormones, inconsistent menaces, dizziness, migraines, reflexes to Aries, Cancer, and Capricorn. So that would directly be associated with the self. And I would assume that you likely get a lot of migraines. Specifically associated with your work. Or just like the stresses of your daily life. Let's see. Neptune. In Sagittarius, wanderlust, sleepwalking, atrophy of the legs and muscles, multiple sclerosis, religious ecstasy, insanity. Don't worry, I'm right there with you with Uranus and Sagittarius. Palsy. Peculiar disorders of the nervous system, spinal cord, weakened lungs, arterially insufficient or leak. Reflexes to Gemini, Pisces, and Virgo. So you having Pluto and Virgo, that's associated with disease, and it's in the 11th house of out of your control. And yeah, Gemini essentially being associated with your 7th house too, and going into your 8th house of disease too. I would assume that those are more prominent than anything else. South Node. Let's see. Let's see. North Node in Aries. No. That's mine, sorry. North Node in Leo. Hardening of the vessels in the heart, heart attack, strong back, lumbago, danger of heart from steroids, structural deformity of the spine, disease of spinal cord. God, that sounds more like me than anything. Oh, because I was reading the North Node, South Node. My bad. Wait, so where's the South Node in Leo? South Node. South Node in Leo. Weakness in heart, weakness in back, and weak eyesight. I was like, wait a minute. I'm like, what? That's weird. Sorry, my bad. So your north node is in Aquarius. If effects of blood pressure, high and low, strong ankles, and weird blood diseases. So Toxema, I'm more than certain you likely have Toxema. If that hasn't been something that you've looked into or been aware of, that's like imperative. Like, yeah, I would even, I'm not a doctor, so I can't say that you do have that, but I would absolutely say, like, I would bet money on it that you actually have something of the sort. Let's see. The 12th house is associated with spiritual work, sleep, psychological problems influencing health, the epidemic of sleep deficiency. Mars and Mercury in air or fire signs or Virgo reflect the tendency towards insomnia. Opposing sixth house has psychological issues that are more typical for planets in this house, especially if the planet is debilitated, retrograde, or receiving poor aspects. You have Saturn retrograde in your sixth house. Okay. Obviously, psychological disturbances are pretty much like checked off because insanity is the first symptom of, you know, spirit attachment or clairvoyancy or all that crap, and I'm well aware of that. Yeah. I take that with a grain of salt. I'm not actually thoroughly convinced that, yeah, there's that. Anyway, so you have an over-excessive... Let's see. Air. Excessive. Nope. Air excess. Air deficient. Are you air deficient? Yeah, you're ridiculously air deficient. Okay, so air deficiency would have symptoms of asthma, suboxygenation of the cells, lung weakness, poor judgment, lack of humor, listless, overly intense, slow in thought and movement, poor circulation, weakened heart, and low blood pressure. Balance of air deficiency would be anything associated with air and fire, breathing exercises, improved bodily oxygenation and circulation. Actually, as a matter of fact, too, something to recommend. I'm fairly sure you can order this online. I get it from like a health food store in my local area. But this is Chloro-Oxygen. It's chlorophyll. So this is wheatgrass tincture, and this will absolutely help with not only some of the toxema or, you know, blood conditions and any kind of built-up toxins in general. It'll help flush that out, but it'll help with the oxygenation of your blood and circulation as well. Let's see, humor therapy, views, mental development exercises, fresh air, juggling, coordination exercises, speech therapy, flexibility exercises, yoga, strengthening the legs and arms, and building strength. So as I told you, that the way that you'll heal yourself is to kind of, you know, express yourself verbally. That's kind of overemphasized with this here too. Let's see. Over the years of clients that have arrived with a deficiency of air element, I always think to ask one question: do you have asthma, shortness of breath, or bronchitis? The reply is typically affirmation. It is evident that air deficient people do indeed lack oxygen. Which is funny that I have asthma because I think I have way too much air. Lack of air can also manifest in the mental plane, and lack of levity comparable to reasoning and objectivity. Recent case of that of a young woman with many talents, however, she could not acquire appropriate schooling for lack of the ability with tests and memorization of facts. Okay, water excess, you definitely have water excess. So water retention, bloat, nausea, fermentations, yeast, sluggishness, low energy, oversleeping, drowsy, oversexed, indulgent, dependent, addictive behaviors, obese, paranoid, tender swellings, pain sensitivity, overly emotional or childish, lazy, depressed, chills, weak eyesight, poor structure or posture, weak teeth and bones, shuns daylight, avoids reality, introversion, noise, sensitivity, soft, growth, tumors, breast lumps, prostate swellings, excessive mucus, and other bodily fluids, avoids reality. So you notice the avoids reality, depressed. Depressed is also a symptom of spirit attachment. Overly emotional is a symptom of spirit attachment. Mineral deficiency, weak teeth and bones is a physiological long-term repercussion and effect, a chronic issue of spirit attachment. Avoids reality, introversion, noise sensitivity, those are all association with actual spirit possession and attachment because they don't like noise. They obviously don't like reality, and they definitely don't like light. They're directly associated with cancer growth, so soft growths and tumors and lumps. So again, wearing those stones will help you alleviate a lot of that right off the bat. And then antidote for water in excess, anything that's associated with fire. So purgatives, sweats, promotes urination, hot spices, exercise, dry heat, heat lamps, cognitive therapy, sunlight, laughter, warm colors, stimulation, affection. Avoid cold, wet, sweet foods. Ice cream and watermelon are the worst for this type, by the way. Improve heart action and circulation. Water type responds excellently to kindness. And then you have, let's see. You have, do you have excessive earth? Yeah, I think you do. I'm pretty sure you do. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Yeah, you do. Okay, so excessive earth is mental dullness, lack of mental creativity, either boring or suffers from chronic sense of boredom with withholding, overeats or overworks. The body is either sluggish or very large and heavy or very bony and emaciated. Curious, the weight extreme observed will depend on the number of other factors. Suffers dryness, constipation, dander, skin problems, eczema, brittle nails, and again, if you take the wheatgrass stuff, this has pretty much almost every single enzyme and mineral and that you can even get in any kind of normal diet to help with any kind of mineral deficiencies and malnutrition. See, unresponsive it says hearing problems, unresponsive, insensitive, generally strong and healthy on a daily level, although highly prone to chronic conditions and cancer due to toxic buildups. Constipation, arthritis, rheumatism, bone spurs, hard, gross, cancer, and great longevity. Antidote for excessive earth would be fire, air, and water. So purgatives, colonic therapy, fasting, vegetarianism, saunas, emotional and effectual development, light eating and light foods, flexibility exercises, dexterity exercises, oil rubs, compresses, conversation, variety, travel, mental stimulation, improved mental speed, verbal and comparative faculties, humor, neurological stimulation, development of social fluidity, dumescent herbs to moisten the mucous membranes, avoid of rich, toxic, or dry foods such as meat, milk products, pastries, breathing exercises will help, and views and flying and reading and writing and yoga. So any herbs that are associated with Aries specifically. So blessed thistle, I'm going to just read off the list, so there's stones in here too. Chicken, cinnamon, coriander, cumin, east wind, garlic, ginger, hemp, hops, juniper, malachite, myrrh, nettle, rosemary, and thyme. Be any of the fire signs. Almond, amber, angelica, bay, burdock, chamomile, eyebright, High John the Conqueror, lavender, lettuce, marigold, mistletoe, motherwort, onyx, rue, saffron, St. John's wort, yarrow, and acorn, amethyst, ash, cedars, deer, lapis, malachite, nutmeg, oak, and yep, just that. Some herbs there. So anything spicy too will help, definitely. Yeah, I think that's the gist. Fixed mode of quadruplicity, Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, Aquarius. Obviously your ascendant IC and then descendant and MC is associated with fixed. Would be chronic conditions are indicated. Yep. I'm sure you're already aware of that. And yeah. Anyway, that's just that. I'm actually just going to end this here. I'll do a part 2 with you because I'm sure you're going to have questions or whatever. And I was actually going to go and review our email correspondence, and partially Facebook, and I think partially because of my computer difficulties and challenges. I'm kind of at my wit's end with checking which one is that and trying to even make sure I can log into stuff. So I'm just going to, since I'm sure that this is over an hour now, I'm just going to render this and send this off to you. And if there's something that you wanted me to address that I missed, I know I didn't touch your daughter's chart yet or anything like that, but maybe you'd want to redirect some of your concerns or whatever more or less to you, since that should be ideally what we should be fixating on anyway. And you have any follow-up questions, we can go ahead and do that too. And yeah.